You're listening to Building Bold Connections, a podcast where we explore the creative ways business leaders have solved professional challenges to gain success and build net worth from their network. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of hearing from Michael Coles, founder and former CEO of Great American Cookie Company, former CEO of Caribou Coffee, and namesake of Kennesaw State University's Coles College of Business.
Welcome to Building Bold Connections. I'm your host, Tyra Burton. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of hearing from Michael Coles, founder and former CEO of Great American Cookie, former CEO of Caribou Coffee, and the namesake of Kennesaw State University's Coles College of Business. Welcome, Michael.
It's nice to be here.
I'm so thankful that you can be here to talk about your experience because you have had so many impact on different industries. So let's start off with the cookies. What got you interested in the cookie business?
Well, it was almost serendipitous because I was in the clothing business and saw a cookie store in California at a clothing show. And I had made a decision on my way to California for the show that I was going to get out of the manufacturing and of the clothing business and do something else because the business was moving to Asia. I had 3 young kids. And I was traveling, 3 days a week. And once the industry moved to Asia, it was going to be 3 weeks a month. And I just wanted to find something else to do. So I saw a cookie store in California, and I came back, and my wife met me at the airport, and I said, I'm going to sell my interest in my clothing company, which, by the way, was named the Great American Clothing Company.
I see a trend.
There's a trend. And I said, I don't know what we're going to do going forward, but while we're trying to figure it out, let's open a cookie store. And I honestly, at the time, it was going to be one store, maybe have a little income from it, trying to figure out what we would do next. And the truth is, as a lot of students and people know, 6 weeks after we started the company, I had a motorcycle accident. That left me with doctors saying I might never walk again unaided. And the truth is, all the other opportunities I might have had just were taken away from me, and I had to focus on the cookie business. And the rest, they say, is cookie history.
It is. I like the fact that kind of trying to spend more time with your family was important in starting the cookie business as well. So can you speak about work-life balance and how you've done that throughout your career?
Well, I talk about this a little bit in my book. My first marriage was unsuccessful. And I wound up, getting divorced. And I decided, just like something goes wrong in business, you're going to make mistakes, but try to not make the same mistakes. And so I had to look really hard at what my responsibility was in that marriage ending. And I just decided that I would make other mistakes in my new marriage, but I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. And I knew one of them was spending more time with my family. And so it was an easy thing for me to balance because anything I did from that point on, the first thought I had is, how does this affect my family? And if it affected my family in a negative way, I just didn't do it.
I think that's wonderful. And you just celebrated, 45 years?
50th.
50th.
We just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary.
Well, I think you figured out how to be successful at it.
It's not easy.
Well, nothing is. You obviously...
it's just compromise,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you've obviously figured out how to build a great team with your wife. How do you build a great team in business?
Well, I started working when I was really young. I started working literally full-time when I was 13, still going to school.
It's very young.
And by the time I was 30, because I had started working so young, I really thought I knew all the answers. And the truth is, at 30, I did know all the answers. But the problem was I didn't know all the questions. And so it took me a while to figure out that I didn't have to be the smartest person in the room and that I could hire really smart people and lead them. And at the end of the day, if we were successful, it would make me look pretty smart. And I think it's about leadership. It's about knowing what you don't know, and I think it's about hiring really good people and then let them do their jobs and let them make mistakes. And just teach them not to make the same mistakes.
Absolutely. So at Caribou, you walked into a situation where you already had a team that was in
Yeah.
place. And I think most of them ended up staying. How did you do that to kind of transfer them into your vision?
Well, Caribou was an interesting place because the first time really that I had done anything in my adult career where I hadn't hired the people and kind of laid out the vision of the company. And Caribou had not been doing well for several years. And I thought walking in that I would be greeted and carried around on everybody's shoulders as this, knight in armor that was going to save the company. But I couldn't have been more wrong. I was, they were very attached to the culture of the business, and they thought this guy that came in a three-piece suit, which I wore deliberately because I didn't want to be seen as one of them.
Right.
I really wanted to come in and understand this, we're going to do something new and different. And so I loosened that later on. But in the beginning, when I walked in, they were very standoffish. And I had thought for a few months about what I would say as an opening remark. I had plenty of time to think about it. And yet, when I made my opening remark, I blew it. My opening remark was, I've been to over 50 Caribou coffees and I've yet to have a good experience. Now, what I meant to say was...
Oh, my.
Yeah. What I meant to say was, and the moment I said it, I saw all the eyes around the table basically dismiss me at that point.
Right.
What I meant to say was, I've been to over 50 Caribou coffees. And while I've had a good experience at some of them, in some day part, it wasn't consistent. And if we can build that great consistency that I felt, if that great experience that I felt in the beginning, and we can do that consistently, we can be a great company. Not just a good company, but a great company. But that's not what I said. And so for the next few weeks, I had to rebuild relationships with everybody in the business. And one of the things I'm really proud of at Caribou, we took that company that had negative same-store sales for almost 3 years. And for the next 2.5 years, we ran double-digit same-store sale increase. Took the company public 2.5 years after I got there on NASDAQ, and basically built the success with the same team with the exception of maybe 2 people.
That's amazing, because usually when somebody comes in, there's a huge changeover. So that's really talks about how well you build teams.
Well, I think it had more to do with the fact that they already were a good team, and I just let the genie out of the bottle. I let them do their job, and so it worked out really well.
I think a theme throughout all your businesses has been this idea of customer experience, and particularly at Caribou, I think that came through. How would you approach building customer experience today with all the changes in the business world?
Well, I think one thing people have to realize that the power of the purchase, which at one time was in the hands of the seller, is now in the hands of the buyer. Nobody buys a car today without going online and figuring out how much it should really cost. There are so many things today that are so different in the way people buy things. And I think that companies have to recognize the fact that people are on all the time. That thing that they're holding in their hand that can make or break a business is there constantly. And that you have to work really hard to earn a customer's return to your business. And my son, who actually is in the alliance business for Fortune 100 companies, told me over the weekend, I didn't even know this, but over the weekend he told me that companies today are now hiring people. There's a new title, and it's the title varies, but it's basically Strategic Customer Relations Officer. Nice. Because people have finally realized that you have to focus on customer experience, because customers don't, in most cases, they don't have a contract to come back. Right. And you've got to give them a reason to want to come back. And nowhere did I have to show that more than at Caribou, because we were up against, at that time, Starbucks, 7,800 stores. We had 170 stores. And my team had to understand that the only thing that matters to a customer is not that Starbucks had 7,800 locations, is that they had a location near a Caribou. And if we get them to come to Caribou, how do we get them not to go back to Starbucks? Right. So that's it.
It's so much easier to keep a customer.
than it is to earn, and it's a lot cheaper.
It is.
Yeah, to keep one than it is to go get a new one.
All right. And I think you talked very well about the fact that the integration of our phones into that customer experience, that it's now that in person as well as what's happening digitally.
Absolutely.
That we keep moving forward. You actually had the idea for the portable office with food. I was just amazed at this before you took over Caribou. You talk about it in your book, where you would have food and coffee as well as a place where people could come and work. And I thought that was just amazingly innovative.
Yeah, it was going to be called Perks, Perqs. And the idea was that it would be an office. It's kind of what WeWorks became.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I didn't do it, as it turned out, because there were a lot of people that had a much better idea than I did. But yeah, it was early on. I mean, this is a long time ago, before WeWorks or a lot of the places now that rent out office space. Yeah, it was going to be like a coffee shop on steroids, but creating a real business office and actually have offices that people could rent by the day or by the hour or however much they needed it. We did a little bit of that at Caribou. We built some stores that had family rooms or party rooms in them. And I would say that if I had the cookie company today, it would be built on a format of having, big party rooms for people to celebrate birthdays and places like that. I think companies just have to continually innovate and understand that they have to understand how their customers use their product.
Yes.
And what things can you add to that experience that might make you more meaningful to them.
And make it easier. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's so much easier to go have a birthday party at a cookie place than
Right.
it is to set it up in your home. So I think that connection to the customer that you stress is so important. Because of cycling and all the other sports you're involved with, you've made many connections with athletes. Do you think there's something about the athlete mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset that goes together?
Well, there's no doubt for me, for sure.
Okay.
I was never an athlete. I did the non-traditional stuff as a kid. I lifted weights, and I got into karate. Of course, karate now, there's tournaments and stuff like that. I did all that, but I would never have considered myself an athlete. I still don't to this day,
Which
even though
just
I've
amazes
ridden
me.
across the country 4 times on a bike. That just shows tenacity. That doesn't show athletic ability.
I think it's a bit of both.
But I do think there is the same mindset, because especially if you're in competitive sports, you have to have people around you that believe in what you're doing. And in sports, especially some of the stuff I did in long distance cycling, I sometimes look back at it and how did I get these people to not sleep at night, leave their families for all that time, and knowing that if I broke a record, I was going to get the credit, and they were just going to get an experience to have helped me do it. But I think it was being honest with people and having to show them how difficult stuff was and how much that you needed them and made them feel important. I think it's very much the same as in business. If people just feel like they're punching a clock every day and there's no connection to whether the company succeeds or fails, you're not going to get the best out of those people. I think people, every survey that we did in all the years I was in business, that when you ask people what was the most important thing to them, it was always communication. It was always about understanding what the company was doing and how decisions affected them as well. And so they could feel that they were a part of something.
So to me, that's about communicating vision and values. How have you done that?
By honesty and openness, and walking into a coffee shop and seeing a couch that had a spill on it, and walking in the back room and getting a rag and wiping it off myself without saying anything to anyone, but seeing what I did lets people know that this is really important, because it is about taking care of customers. And if the CEO of the company is willing to walk in and wipe off the chair,
Right.
then shouldn't we? It must mean something. And it's not just that, but I had, I'll tell you, one of the great experiences I had was with Joe Rogers from the Waffle House. And he was the first time, Joe and I have known each other a long time, and he used the term servant leadership, which of course is very common today.
Right.
But when he said it, I had never heard the term before. But I think servant leadership is really so important, is the fact that anything in a company, I don't care what your position is, you should not be above the most menial parts of what a company does. And it's because all of it's important.
Right.
And I think that some of that got lost for a long time in American business. I think it's coming back, and it's coming back in a really strong way because people are beginning to understand the value of experience for customers and how important it is for everybody on the team to believe in that.
Well, and I think you also believe in making sure you know all of the business.
Right.
So that you have experienced, what it means to serve a cup of coffee.
And you don't have to be an expert in every one of those areas either. You hire people that are experts and you can learn from each other.
Absolutely. So how should business leaders today apply your wonderful mantra of time to get tough while working in their respective fields?
Well, time to get tough for me was, an expression that came out of a bicycle accident I had on my second attempt to get across the country. And I broke my collarbone, and so I was trying to train for a third crossing. And I was so painful that I was on the bike for like an hour on a trainer, and every pedal stroke just hurt so bad. I remember saying to myself, I said, I've got to get tough. I got to get tough. It's time to get tough. You got to get tough. And when I got off the bike, I just decided it got me through it.
Right.
And I decided, well, that's a great mantra. I'm gonna use that theme of time to get tough. Well, it's a long expression. So I just turned it into TTGT, and I put it everywhere, on my bike, on my refrigerator, in my closet, on the bathroom, everywhere, because I had a lot of recovery to do. And I think that's the thing in business too, is that if you have a team of people around you and things are not going exactly the way they should, the fact of the matter is, if everybody believes in it, it is time to get tough, and it's not time to walk away. It's time to walk in.
And really capitalize on those extension
Right.
of values and people knowing their jobs.
The thing is that the way to endear yourself to the people that are part of your team is you try to do it during the good times. So when the bad times hit, they're still with you.
No, I think that's absolutely true. So one thing I was surprised at, which I think fits very well with the building that we're recording in, this is the MEBUS building at Kennesaw State University, where our music and entertainment business program is. You say that one of your biggest but least known successes is the impact you had on the Georgia film and entertainment industry. What bold ideas and connections made that possible? Because you really helped change the landscape for us here in Georgia.
Well, so in 1998, after I lost my U.S. Senate race and my friend Roy Barnes became governor, Roy called me and said, look, I'd love to have your help in my administration. He said, what would you like to do? And I said, Roy, Georgia used to be one of the great places for people to make films when Burt Reynolds was around, and some of the great movies that we've seen came out of Georgia, but it seems like it's all disappeared. And I said, is there still a film commission? And he said, there is. I said, do they have a board? He said, I don't think they're active anymore. And Georgia at that time, we weren't even on the map any longer.
No,
the only thing that was being made in Georgia were civil rights movies or something that might be specific to Georgia. And even some of those things were not being made in Georgia. And so I asked him if I could become the head of the film commission and put together a board. And what I did is I put together a 40-person board.
Wow.
And every single person that was on that board brought a skill set that had something to do, even if it was a little bit obscure, to the movie industry. I then spent the next 6 to 9 months traveling around Georgia and traveling all over the country, meeting with producers, directors, writers, trying to understand. I went to other places that were doing really well in the film business and tried to figure out what they were doing. And then we put an ideation meeting together after about 9 months with the whole team, trying to figure out what are the next steps to rebuild this industry. And we took that plan. We got the first tax incentive passed in, I think, my second year of running the commission. And that began to change everything. We went from 180 million in economic impact, most of it which was music, which is how I got to know Joel.
Absolutely.
And most of which was music. And when I left 4 years later, well, 2 years later, we're $1.5 billion in economic impact. And today, Georgia's $13 billion and the number one full feature motion picture production place in the world. And I'm very proud of that.
Well, you should be. I think the impact that it's had on the Georgia economy just cannot be underestimated. So you wrote, "Great leaders know what they don't know." What do you still have to learn?
Well, I don't know because I don't know. So I would just say this, that when I'm involved in something, and I get involved in a lot of nonprofit things. I advise a couple, 3 different companies. Here's what I know now that I didn't know.
Okay.
I know now that when I'm asked a question, I don't immediately give an answer if I'm not sure of it, because I want to know all the facts. As a young guy, I used to make a lot of impulsive decisions, and every time I did it, it was wrong. Every single time. And it was like a punching bag. I mean, I just kept doing the same thing, not realizing that maybe I should think differently about my answer. And so now you ask me a question like that, I can't give you that answer because I'm not in a situation to know what I don't know. All the stuff I'm doing right now, I think I know. But you put me in some other situation, and I'm sure I'll figure out that I don't really have the answer to that. I'm going to go find somebody who does, someone that's an expert, someone that can make me look smart and make sure that I don't make a mistake, because they've already been through the war and I haven't.
I think that idea of wisdom and what you can bring with wisdom to people and to things, and your ability to research. I love the fact that you always dive hard and find out what's out there. So we're about at the end, but I wanted to ask you one final question. When you were first starting out, you were on a flight back to Detroit. You talk about it in your book, and you asked the passenger sitting next to you, what advice would you give to a young guy like me starting out in the business world? So what advice would you give a young person sitting next to you that asked you this question today?
So I'm going to tell that story real quick.
Oh, please do. It's beautiful.
I was 22 years old. I just won a big sales contest for my company, and my company flew me back. I lived in Grand Rapids, but I had to go through Detroit to get back. And they flew me back first class, and I'd never been on a first class flight before. And I was sitting next to a guy who today would be on a private plane, I'm sure, but there were no private planes back then. And he was wearing a Rolex watch, which I had never seen one up close ever before. And he was more interested in how a 12-year-old, because that's how old I looked, how a 12-year-old, what I was doing flying first class. And so I never got to ask him any questions as we were about to land. That's when I asked him, I said, what advice would you give a young guy? And it's the same advice I give people today because it's never changed. He said to me without hesitation, he said, take risks as young as you possibly can, because the older you get, the more complicated your life's going to get, and taking risks just becomes harder. He said, when you're young, you got plenty of time to recover if you make a mistake. And that would be the advice I would give folks. But, young is a lot different today than it used to be. True. People are starting businesses at 50, 60, 70 years old and taking life experiences to do it. But again, I would say that it's all about doing it when risk does not seem as risky, and do it as young as you possibly can be.
Well, I love that. And I hope that everybody has enjoyed our time with Michael Coles. I know that I appreciate the impact that you've had on the college that I'm a part of, our music and business institutes here, as well as just the beautiful businesses you've built. Thank you so much, Michael.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Building Bold Connections. This has been a Coles College and Joel A. Katz Music and Entertainment Business Program production.